want to lose sight of onshore wind, which is very important. Not that they're going to build a lot of onshore wind in New Jersey, but they can certainly purchase it from other states. Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a tremendous success story, as you can tell by the numbers in Pennsylvania. Even though their percentage, 8% Tier 1, is a pretty low RPS by national standards, and a very low solar carve-out. Pennsylvania had actually 16 fully operating wind farms. They have 750 megawatts of installed capacity, so it's enough to power 218,000 homes. They have a pretty large potential. Pennsylvania's grid state for wind. At least 4,000 megawatts of wind energy can be built onshore in Pennsylvania. They're also actually looking for and to consider offshore wind legislation. You say Pennsylvania is not on the ocean, but they have Lake Erie, and Lake Erie is a very good source of wind. So they're considering legislation. It was considered last year, did not pass, but there's still some discussion to bring that legislation back. Okay. Virginia, it's a 15% RPS, but the key point about Virginia is that it's a voluntary standard. Voluntary makes a big difference. If it's mandatory, by law, they have to meet that, unless there's some provision that allows them to get out of it by exception. In Virginia, technically, under the law, the utilities in Virginia do not have to meet the voluntary RPS, because it's a voluntary RPS. If a utility decides in Virginia to go forward and comply on its own, basically, with the RPS standard, the SEC is supposed to provide a 50 basis point addition to the electric utilities rate of return. So basically, it adds to their profit on their investments in the state, and it's sort of the bonus for complying with the statute. So that's supposed to give the utilities an incentive to meet the voluntary requirements. Unfortunately, from my perspective, APCO, Appalachian Power Company, actually brought long-term contracts for wind energy to the SCC, to the State Corporation Commission, and both those contracts, or actually 3 contracts, were denied for cost recovery by the utility. So it might have a chilling effect. We're not 100% sure at this point, but that could have a chilling effect on development in Virginia, or just the idea of utilities that want to meet the voluntary standards if the commission is not allowing cost recovery on those things. Utilities are risk-averse entities. They certainly don't want to lose money, and that certainly could be a loss. They could lose money on that particular deal if they can't eventually get the commission to grant the cost recovery, at least it's the incremental cost recovery that was denied for those particular projects. Yes?
Do you have any idea how those were priced?
How they were priced?
Yeah, is that public?
I don't have the details. I just know that one of the reasons why the commission said they denied those, it was going to add X amount of dollars to a person's bill. It wasn't a lot. It was $2 or $3, $4, something like that per month on the bill. And they said, given the economic times and a couple other factors, maybe they could have found cheaper alternatives. All these different things, the commission denied it. But I don't know the exact pricing of those particular contracts. Virginia's also in the hunt for offshore wind. I told you there's a 500 megawatt project that's located 20 miles off the coast of Virginia Beach, and that's also listed in the PJMQ. And in 2010, there was legislation that basically set up an authority that was to facilitate the development of offshore wind industry in Virginia. although it's an unfunded organization, which is certainly problematic. If you don't have funding, how do you operate and do some of the things that you're told to do? And basically, they're just there to facilitate. They're not there to provide funding to get these things started. They might provide some funding if they can access it. They might provide some funding for some of the setup type issues like getting a med tower and doing some of the other studies that have to get done before a wind project gets sited, but they're not going to actually support the project itself once it's from a financial basis, which some authorities in other states do.
And I just add to that, Bruce, I sat at the third meeting of Nevada a couple of weeks ago. There is language in this past budget that is still a little bit fuzzy that would provide them some initial seed funding, at least help the organization itself start steering the ship in that direction. But that's still, at this moment, the funding's not there.
I think what they did is they added, I'm not sure what the agency is, but they added the responsibility to a particular agency without giving them at that point the particular funding.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. West Virginia is another, I would say, becoming a success story in the Mid-Atlantic region. It has a long way to go, but they have a 25% mandatory RPS requirement, but it's their RPS is called the Alternative and Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard, and the alternative, I've highlighted that word because in West Virginia, alternative could be coal-based type, cleaner coal-based type applications. It could be things like natural gas. That's not a renewable resource in any sense, nor is it. It's cleaner than coal, but it's not clean. So the concern about West Virginia's RPS or AREPS is that it may not be effective for renewable energy. But I can say they've had some success in getting wind farms developed, 431 megawatts of installed capacity. I think some of the developers in here are working on projects in West Virginia. So West Virginia is at least a state that's moving forward and has a lot of potential projects in the PJM. And the other nice thing about West Virginia, their state public service commission, which regulates rates and looks at these types of contracts, they've actually approved several long-term wind contracts as opposed to what happened here in Virginia. The important point is that the wind penetration right now is not very high. In the country, it's about 2%. It's much better than where it was. It's improving significantly. But significant wind penetration in the U.S. is technically feasible. It's mandated because of these state laws that require percentage of renewables, but it's going to be mostly wind, I think, in my opinion, that's going to be built because of these laws. And it's very sound policy, and I'm going to go into that a little bit. According to AWEA, almost 20%, or an amount equal to 20% of the U.S. generation is being held up because of a lack of adequate transmission. We're going to talk about that in a lot more detail in a few minutes, transmission, as things of how do we get from here to there. But that's an important fact. Very important fact is the next bullet, which is the Department of Energy and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory report that was issued in January of 2010. Basically said that they ran a number of scenarios and said that basically 20 to 30% penetration is possible, technically feasible, by the year 2024, which is pretty significant. It certainly shows that significant penetration can be had if we build transmission to do it. And then, of course, the states think, there are 29 states and 9 states in this region that think that this should be done, because they have renewable portfolio standards going from 8% to 25% in this region. So wind penetration should improve quite a bit over the next few years, but it needs this continued aggressive look at wind. Okay, why wind? Why is it so important? Well, it certainly enhances energy security. And the reason for that is that we're not going to just be relying on the same old fossil fuel technology. Okay, we're going to be relying on cleaner technologies, not just wind, solar, geothermal, a lot of other good technologies out there that are zero carbon emitting and zero polluting. And but really the bottom line there is that by doing that, it's going to, in the long run, impact what we have to buy from other countries. Even with oil. You don't use oil necessarily. It can be used to generate electricity. We don't use that much oil to generate electricity in this country. But if cars are being powered by electric instead of gasoline, oil, then, and it's clean from wind and other renewables, and there's going to be a mix of natural gas and some other nuclear and some other types of fuel sources. That will take the reliance away dramatically over time from foreign sources of fuel. I think you're going to hear a discussion today on how it's to boost economic development in areas where wind resources are developed. I have an example right after this slide. I'll just go over that real quickly in a minute. I don't think there's any doubt, but people do claim this, but it's going to improve the environment, because wind certainly is, and other renewables are zero polluting and zero carbon emitting. So very important. As I indicated, it's the law. I mean, it's required in these 9 states in this region and the District of Columbia. So it's another reason to do it, because the states want to do it, which means people want to do it. Wind energy has provided prices that are competitive with other new generation options. And if you're going to build some new plants in this country, they get quite expensive, and so wind is certainly competitive with those particular, those newer generation options that are out there. And we have an aging coal fleet out there of generators that are going to be receiving some stricter regulations, and some of those coal plants will shut down. Some may clean up their